Good morning, Ryan Grimm. It's so great to have you here, Krystal. If people are listening to this, they're like, that's not very funny. You're just talking to Ryan Grimm. But no, I'm indeed joined today by the one and only Krystal Ball. Thanks for being here.
I would be happy to download Ryan's brain, but I'll do my best here.
So we're going to start with updates this morning, Krystal, in the case of Abrego Garcia. We have a lot to get to that happened over the last 24 hours. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the movement in the markets and developments in the trade war. Also developments in potentially an upcoming hot war, hopefully not, but Iran, tensions continue to escalate with Iran. There were some moves taken here in D.C. towards Trump administration officials who may not be on board with the administration's plan just yesterday, who ended up on administrative leave. We'll dive into all of that. Krystal, the story of the Ivy Leagues in this second Trump administration is heating up. Harvard is now pushing back on Donald Trump, and you will be shocked to learn that the Dems are in disarray, dare I say?
Maybe. I don't know. Yes, they're always in disarray, but there's some interesting emerging data about how, first of all, the Trump 2.0 era plus sort of centrist capitulation has really shifted the Democratic base, both against their leadership and also, for the first time that I can certainly recall, a majority are saying they actually want the party to be more progressive. And AOC is, according to one new poll, really rising in the esteem of the Democratic base as like an actual potential national leader. So a lot of shifts happening there. And then we have Brian Goldstone on. He's written a really important, this is going to be a great show, written a really important new book about, we talk so much about the working poor. He digs into the working homeless, which is increasingly a reality. People who are doing everything they can, working full time, but because housing and rent is so expensive, they still cannot afford a home. And he specifically tells the story of a number of families in and around Atlanta. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him about this, because obviously housing is just a central issue to everyone in the entire country.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that as well, Krystal. Let's start with developments in the case of Abrego Garcia. Yesterday, the judge in that deportation case said that she was going to demand information from the government judge. Quote, "We have to give process to both sides, but we're going to move. There will be no tolerance for gamesmanship or grandstanding." Now, we have a clip here of Abrego Garcia's wife speaking ahead of the hearing that happened yesterday in Greenbelt, Maryland, so actually not too far from Washington, D.C. We can go ahead and roll this clip. It's A1.
I will not stop fighting until I see my husband alive. Kilmar, if you can hear me, stay strong. God hasn't forgotten about you. Our children are asking, when would you come home? And I pray for the day I tell them the time and date that you'll return. As we continue through Holy Week, my heart aches for my husband, who should have been here leading our Easter prayers. Instead, I find myself pleading with the Trump administration and the Bukele administration to stop playing political games with the life of Kilmar. Our family is torn apart during this scary time, and our children miss their dad so much.
So, Krystal, the district judge in this case ordered administration officials, I'm reading from NBC News here, to, quote, turn over evidence of their efforts to help bring him back to the U.S. since she first ordered them to, quote, facilitate his return, saying the government had not shown her anything of note on that front. I've got nothing, she said. I've gotten no real response and no real legal justification for not answering, adding that if the admin is not going to answer questions, quote, then justify why. That's what we do in this House. And many people read that as a sign that she was weighing contempt charges in this case, which would get incredibly interesting. It's already quite an interesting case, but that would make it even more interesting.
Yeah. So just as a refresher for people, I know you guys probably know already some of the contours of this case. And we actually, Emily, you and I and Ryan had a chance to interview one of his lawyers and get some of the specifics about the timeline of how all of this ultimately unfolded. But the Trump administration, at least initially, admitted that this was an error. He had a court order saying you cannot deport this man to El Salvador, and they deported him to El Salvador, and specifically to this notorious torture dungeon in El Salvador. So they acknowledged that they had made a mistake, both in court filings and also in their presentation in court. And their position was, we screwed up, but we're not going to do anything about it, and you can't make us. And that's been their official position. Now, over the past several days, led by Stephen Miller, they are now reversing course and claiming that, no, actually, this wasn't a mistake. This is the place where he should be. So they've had a rhetorical shift. But in terms of their court posture, the things that they said previously and attested to previously remain, that this was a clear-cut error, that he had an order barring his removal to El Salvador, and the administration screwed up when they sent him to this torture dungeon. So now where we are is the Supreme Court says you have to facilitate his return. They say, we want a clarification on this term effectuate that came from the district court because it could potentially conflict with the, foreign policy prerogatives of the executive. So we want a clarification there. The district court judge said, just facilitate's good enough. I'm just going to take that word effectuate out. Then she ordered the government to, on a daily basis, provide an update about his well-being and status and about every step they are taking to facilitate his return. The Trump administration has, at this point, done nothing to facilitate the return. Those filings, which are supposed to come in, I believe, at 5 p.m. every day, they've been late with them. They have not been sufficient in terms of what they are supposed to provide. They frequently, one of them just said, he's alive and he's in the sovereign custody of El Salvador, basically. So this judge has been, for a little while now, sort of building a case for potential contempt is certainly what it looks like. And if we put A5 up on the screen, this is the headline from Politico. Yesterday's hearing really was kind of a coming to a head kind of a moment after Trump had hosted Bukele himself in the White House, and they played this little game of Trump saying, I can't bring him back, and Bukele saying, oh, well, I can't release him. Both of them acting like they're powerless, which obviously is utterly absurd. Politico says the judge is now launching an inquiry into the Trump administration's refusal to seek the return of this wrongly deported man. Again, this is really directly in contravention of a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling saying you have to help to facilitate this man's return. And so what the judge is saying is, okay, you've got 2 weeks. We are launching an intensive investigation. She even said, cancel your vacation plans. I don't want any messing around. No gamesmanship. She's giving she's giving them a chance to depose the government witnesses, people who have specific knowledge, to get them specifically on the record about what they know. And then it does seem like potentially this is building up to a finding of contempt. We have had many instances at this point, Emily, of this administration either really taking liberties with how they're interpreting judgments, with trying to skate by, of not really complying with judicial orders, but giving themselves some sort of rhetorical cover. And I think we've all been wondering, when does this come to a point where there is a direct clash between the courts and between the Trump administration? And I think this is the case that is heading to that point. The last thing I'll say, and this is going on a bit of a tangent, but the reason this case is important is because, and the reason why the administration is fighting so hard on this case, is because the moment you open the door to being able to bring people back from that prison, then it ruins their plan to be able to send people there, whoever they want, including, apparently, American citizens, with no due process. If the courts have any sort of say over what happens in that prison, then it screws up what they have been wanting to do, which is to use the Alien Enemies Act and whatever provisions, potentially the insurrection or whatever they want to do with regard to U.S. citizens, where they feel like if we can just get them on the planes fast enough, then we don't have to deal with the court system. We don't have to go through due process. They don't get to have their say in court. And we can just say, oopsie, they're already there. There's nothing we can do. The moment that you are able to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back to the United States and they are forced to do that, that plan is completely undermined, which underscores that even though, you know, we've talked a lot about the specifics of the case certainly matter, all that is important. But this is about much more than this one man. And it truly, especially with Trump out there talking about the quote unquote homegrowns, truly does have direct implications for the entire population, citizen and non.
Well, let's get to that clip, actually. Control room, I'm going to go out of order, but this is A4. It was from an interview that Donald Trump, or at least aired yesterday evening on Fox Noticias with Rachel Campostafi. So here's Donald Trump, A4.
Could we use it for violent criminals, our own violent criminals?
I call them homegrown criminals.
Yes.
I mean, the
homegrowns.
The ones that grew up and something went wrong and they hit people over the head with a baseball bat. We have, and push people into subways just before the train gets there, like you see happening sometimes. We are looking into it and we want to do it. I would love to do that.
So, to your point, Krystal, that is rather chilling. I'm not quite sure how the Trump administration envisions that process or that execution, but something that we will obviously be keeping an eye on. And I want to play this clip of Caroline Leavitt as we transition into how Democrats are now mounting a response. This is A3, Caroline Leavitt, yesterday's White House press briefing, addressing many questions on the case of Abrego Garcia.
Still going off the El Salvador questions, yesterday in the Oval Office, administration officials made it very clear that El Salvador is responsible for Mr. Abrego Garcia, yet El Salvador's president said we're not going to do anything with him. So my question is, who is responsible for this man and where he's going to end up?
Well, no. First of all, President Bukele said that he is not going to smuggle a foreign terrorist back into the United States of America, as many in this room in the Democrat Party seemingly want him to do. Abrego Garcia was a foreign terrorist. He is an MS-13 gang member. He was engaged in human trafficking. He illegally came into our country. And so deporting him back to El Salvador was always going to be the end result. There is never going to be a world in which this is an individual who's going to live a peaceful life in Maryland, because he is a foreign terrorist and a MS-13 gang member. Not only have we confirmed that, President Bukele yesterday in the Oval Office confirmed that as well. So he went back to his home country, where he will face consequences for his gang affiliation and his engagement in human trafficking. I'm not sure what is so difficult about this for everyone in the media to understand. And it's appalling, truly appalling, that there has been so much time covering this alleged human trafficker and this gang member, MS-13 gang member. It's truly striking to me.
So, Krystal, this case study, the Trump administration picked the dumbest possible fight as it's trying to do mass deportations, because, and I think from your perspective, there's maybe strategy in it about what they can do with deportations to El Salvador in particular, but it is astounding how stupid this particular case study is. There are, according to the New York Times, there were like 8 million net new migrants into this country over the course of the Biden administration. That is the population of multiple states put together. And their case studies are Kilmar Abrego Garcia. They have very little evidence that he actually is MS-13, and there were also legal processes in place that they did not properly deal with. And you have the other alleged Tren de Aragua members, the Venezuelan barber, et cetera, as Dropsite has reported, and more down in El Salvador as well. And they're trying to do mass deportations, but they keep stumbling into the dumbest possible fights, not just for a media perspective, but also for like the actual substance of doing these policies. The execution has really been a disaster, and it's just like unbelievable how poorly they've handled this situation. It's a real, like, when you're looking back on the last 4 years of the Biden administration. For the Trump administration, this is a slam dunk, and I think that's almost hurt them because they came into this with so much confidence and hubris and political capital that they've just wasted it by not handling these legal processes carefully enough because they thought, it won't matter. People just want others gone, so it'll be like a cool own the libs moment to send people down to Bukele. Now, as we transition to Democrats, I want to say...
Let me just say, look, I'm sorry. These people are fascists. They want to be able to ship whoever they want to a torture dungeon for life. The entire purpose of that prison is so that people never leave. Never leave. You're talking about this man who Caroline Leavitt says alleged human trafficker. There is zero evidence of human trafficking. No one has ever said that. They will just make shit up. This MS-13 bullshit is because he was wearing a Chicago Bulls hat. That's what we're talking about here. We learned about a 19-year-old who didn't even have a tattoo, who I said, this is the wrong guy. Didn't matter. He's now there being tortured in this prison for life. And their position is, we don't care. It's not that they genuinely think these are gang members and they're, no. The point is to prove they can send anyone, you, me, your family, your brother. That is the point. So yes, it's a strategy. And that's why this fight is so important. Because number one, you should care about this man who does not deserve this. I mean, very few people do deserve to be locked in this dungeon, which is rife with human rights abuses. You barely get fed. There's like 60 people in a cell, no mattresses, no blankets, no time outside even, none. For life. That's what they have sent these people to do. And again, yes, there was a significant backlash against the Biden administration immigration policies. But when you ask people even more specific questions about like, hey, should we deport people who've been here for 10 years and have no criminal record? They're like, no. But they were convinced that the immigrant population was just rife with all sorts of criminals. And that's the other thing with this policy, that the reason why they can't send off the worst of the worst is because, yeah, of course, there are some number of undocumented immigrants who are criminals, much less than the native-born population. And so it's not so easy to round up plane loads of criminals to make your big statement. So what do they do instead? They round up the gay barber. They round up this 19-year-old who's done nothing wrong. They round up Abrego Garcia, who has a court order saying you cannot do this. And then they ship them off before anyone has a chance to say, well, are these gang members? Did they commit any crimes? We now know 90% of the people that they sent committed no crimes. 90%. So I want to be really clear about what we're dealing with here. It's not an optics problem. It's not a strategy problem. It is an authoritarian fascism problem. That's what it is. And so when Trump is out here saying the homegrowns are next, you know, again, they're actually, when they've polled even on criminal American citizens being sent to this torture dungeon, people have said no, no way. Like, why would we do that? But there is no reason you should have any confidence that this administration would truly send the quote unquote worst of the worst. Their worst of the worst is Andre, the gay makeup artist who was applying for asylum. That's their definition of the worst of the worst. We know the way that they're expanding the definition of terrorism to include people who dare say the wrong thing about Israel, people who harbor ill sentiment against Teslas, people who go to hands-off protests to push back against the insanity that they see unfolding in their country. That's who they want to use these powers against. And so, you know, to transition to what the Democrats are doing and why they've finally somewhat woken up, you've got Chris Van Hollen, who's a senator from Maryland, and Abrego Garcia, of course, was living in Maryland. And he said, you know what, I'm going to El Salvador apparently today. I'm going to El Salvador and I'm going to try to figure out what is going on. I'm going to try to get access to him. I'm going to try to talk to, you know, diplomats, or if he can, the president of El Salvador himself. There are other efforts for other politicians to be able to go, because they finally realized that this is part of a broader project. This is not just about this one man. And guess what? The people are on your side. When you ask people, do you want to deport and send to a torture dungeon an innocent man because of an administrative error and never get him back, guess what? You're going to be on the right side of those politics. Let's take a listen, A6, to Chris Van Hollen.
I saw the comments of President Bukele, and I look forward to meeting with him. I've requested to meet with him. I reached out to the ambassador here to ask to meet while he's here. But I've also made clear if we can't meet here, I do intend to go to El Salvador to discuss the release of this individual who is illegally detained. Of course, President Trump could have just said, bring him home. Of course he could have done that. But this is an administration that has lied about Mr. Abrego Garcia, right? The vice president of the United States tweeted out that he had a criminal record. That was a lie. They're just lying. They've gotten caught lying. They don't want to admit it. And they have an obligation to bring him home. But I will say the president of El Salvador should not now take it upon himself to say that he is detaining him for one more day, because that is kidnapping. I understand that the Attorney General said that we would provide a plane to bring him home. So all the president of El Salvador has to do now is hand over and release an innocent man and let him come home to his family.
And if we put go ahead, Krystal.
I was just going to say, and of course, if Trump asked Bukele, we need this guy back, he would be back. If Bukele went to the prison that he runs under a state of exception and said, we need this guy, of course he would be able to get this guy back. There were some women who we tried to send to, and a few individuals who are from other Central American countries. And Bukele said, no, we can't take women. We can't take these other people. He's worried about his relationship with these other Central and South American countries. So he sent them back as well. Like, they're playing this game as if we're idiots and we can't see what's going on here.
So we can put the next element up on the screen. Other Democrats are doing what Van Hollen is doing, reportedly, including Senator Cory Booker, and planning trips down to El Salvador, or trying to plan trips down to El Salvador. This is according to a new report from Axios. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, if we put A7 up on the screen, continues to your point, Krystal, lean very firmly into this case. Vice President J.D. Vance was mixing it up with actually Zed Jelani on X yesterday, going back.
Richard Hanania too, I think.
Oh, really? Was he tweeting at Hanani? Oh my goodness. Okay, he was definitely tweeting back and forth with Zed. In this particular exchange, Zed was making the point. He said, why do you say Abrego Garcia has no legal right to be here when the Supreme Court said the opposite, 9-0? And that was in response to JD saying, are you proposing that we invade, this is to Mikel Jallet, we invade El Salvador to retrieve a gang member with no legal right to be in our country? Where in the Supreme Court's decision does it require us to do that? Now, obviously, Krystal, Bukele is an ally of this administration. Bukele was sitting next to them in the Oval Office just 24 hours before that tweet was posted, and would obviously help them facilitate or effectuate the return of Abrego Garcia to the United States. But the administration is very much leaning into this idea that this is a guy, MS-13, he can be sent anywhere. And I just want to say, the point that you were making about El Salvador in particular, this is going to be an enormous problem, I think, for the right in the next couple of years, this relationship with Bukele, this particular prison, because a lot of Republicans, Democrats are now making the trek down to El Salvador, or trying to. A lot of Republicans have gone, Kristi Noem, Republican members of Congress, have gone and done photo ops inside of that prison. They have done their photo ops with Nayib Bukele. That is anti-American. What is happening in that prison is anti-American. And I get that other countries are not accepting their own citizens, and I think that is genuinely a problem. I agree with J.D. Vance and Donald Trump on that. I think that is genuinely a problem. Sending them to dungeons in El Salvador is not actually going to long-term fly with the public if you are also ignoring the legal processes that are in place when people have done things. And this is what Biden, I mean, some of this is through Joe Biden. Abrego Garcia applied for asylum, and I think he actually applied for asylum during the Trump administration when he first applied. I think it was 2019.
Right.
But there are a lot of people because these pathways were opened up in the Biden administration. And that means the Trump administration has to deal with that. It sucks and it's not fair in every case, but it does mean that we have legal processes in place where you do have to deal with those things. Otherwise, to your point, Krystal, everyone else's rights get eroded down the line. And the flippancy is, I mean, it has some conservatives. Andy McCarthy is one. Rod Dreher is another. Really freaked out by what they're seeing from the Trump administration. More than I think this is more than I've seen on another issue in the second Trump administration. It's been upsetting to some people on the right. The only other thing I'll add, though, is Democrats need to be really careful because as important as I think this is, it's going to make it look like they got all up in arms about one guy who did legitimately enter the country illegally when net 8 million people came into the country. They need to play this very, very carefully under the Biden administration, often with their support. So I do think they have to be careful with how they approach going to El Salvador, which I think, by the way, is legitimately a brave thing to do, given how Bukele is likely to treat them, and respect on that part, but they, with their own constituents, I mean, Democrats were unhappy with the Biden administration immigration policies, so they do need to play that pretty carefully.
I think some of that is overstated because, like I said, yes, if you ask people, okay, should we do mass deportation, there's still, somewhat of a consensus there. If you ask them any of the specifics, the view is very different. And no, they are not on board with shipping random innocent people to this torture dungeon for life. So, but also, frankly, even if the politics were bad, sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes it's important. Sometimes you have to make the case.
I think they should have done that during Biden. I genuinely think that's on the substance. They should have done that during the Biden administration.
Done what?
They should have taken what was happening at the border much more seriously during the Biden administration. I'm not saying Republicans did it for the right reason, but I think it was pretty obvious there was something disastrous.
Well, happening. That's a whole other conversation because in my view, what Democrats did is completely capitulate to the right-wing immigration hawk framing in a way that was utterly disastrous. Now, I think there is likely to be a huge backlash in the other direction. Immigration expansion has never been more popular than it was during the first Trump administration because people were disgusted with the tactics that he was using then. And it is nothing compared to what they're doing now. And also the very clear, with Trump talking about homegrowns, very clear implication that U.S. citizens are going to be next. So last thing, just with regard to the specifics of Abrego Garcia, if we could put A8 up on the screen, just in terms of their supposed proof that he's some hardened MS-13 gang member. Apparently the cop who was the person who initially claimed that he had alleged MS-13 membership based on some sketchy confidential informant that are, they're known to be not particularly reliable. He was fired and indicted weeks later after making this claim for sharing case info with a sex worker. And the only other evidence that they have and by the way, the confidential informant claimed that he was part of MS-13 in a part of the country in New York where he doesn't live and has, rarely, if ever, even been to. And then the only other piece of evidence they have is that he was wearing a Chicago Bulls hat. So that's what we're talking about. And then when Caroline Levitt's oh, he's a human trafficker. No one has ever said that. That is completely, utterly made up false. So, I think Democrats have to fight on this issue. Both, I do think they're on solid political ground, but even if they're not, you cannot create a massive loophole in the law that allows the Trump administration to disappear whoever they want, whenever they want, and be able to uphold this. And we can't do anything once they're there. That's that.
When it's not good for anyone. That's whenever civil liberties are threatened, it's, always the point. You can tell if people are principled defenders of civil liberty by how vehemently they defend due process when their enemy's due process is threatened. And so, it could very well end up being used by a Democratic administration down the road if we slide fully into banana republicanism in a way that hurts Republicans, in a way that hurts conservatives, Christians, whatever. You can see how it would, those standards can very easily slip. So we have to, before we run on this, Krystal, we have to get the next element up on the screen.
You found this. Love this.
Kristi Noem, it's sort of a funny image if you're watching this. The Daily Beast made a funny image to go along with it of Kristi Noem in all of her outfits, kind of treating herself like a Barbie. And the Daily Beast writes, Ice Barbie keeps creating all kinds of headaches for Homeland Security. But actually, there was a Wall Street Journal, it was a long Wall Street Journal story yesterday that indicated Kristi Noem's peers are not pleased with her. They think that she, according to this report in the Journal, is harming their efforts actually to try and do mass deportations. And Krystal, I think what this highlights is there are real fractures within the administration because doing these mass deportations in a way that is actually mass, if you're actually going to hit the targets that the Trump administration promised to do, if you are going to do it without causing these protracted legal battles where even the right is divided on how legally or how legally dubious your track is in that case, and if you're also going to do it in a way that is politically going well, they are not doing that right now. There's a lot of internal consternation about how ably this administration is approaching it, and it looks like Kristi Noem is going to be taking some arrows. She already is in the Wall Street Journal, but this could bubble to the surface for her in a rather problematic way going forward that could make all of those Bukele photo ops and outfits look really foolish.
Yeah, I mean, she's playing dress up. Like, it's preposterous. She's just making herself look utterly ridiculous. Did you see the video where her, like, big-ass gun was, like, pointed at the dude next to his head, and he, like, takes a look at where her gun is pointed and, like, backs up sort of subtly? I mean, it's just, yeah, she's a ridiculous person. I mean, the Barbie moniker is actually accurate here because she has all these little, like, dress-up outfits.
She's taking it to herself.
Swapping in, you know, oh, she's doing her Coast Guard thing. She's doing her, she's got her ice flak jacket on. I mean, she had like a freaking ice, like the big bulletproof vest on in Manhattan and like the streets of New York City. Like, girl, where do you think you are? And with the full extensions and the full eyelashes and the whole bit. And it's also like, lady, you're like 50 something years old, you know? I don't know. The whole thing is just a part of a grotesque spectacle to me. So I'm glad at least someone is also noticing and being like, you know what, this is kind of gross.
Well, Megyn Kelly went after her. That reminds me. Megyn Kelly and some others have started, I think Ann Coulter have started going after her. Sarah Palin went after her recently.
Oh, really?
So yeah, she's definitely taking some arrows.
What did Megyn go after her for?
The outfits.
Really? Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It is.
It's like embarrassing.
It really is. Like, she's a law enforcement officer. It's starting to look completely, I mean, I shouldn't say it's starting to look, it looks completely unserious and ridiculous. But I think that this is genuinely a problem for the administration because this was like their big ticket issue.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.